Hi, it's 2 o'clock, and I thought I would get started because I said we would start at 2, and I didn't want to waste anyone's time. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background. I was a high school teacher, a social studies teacher for 15 years in a variety of school districts in Colorado. And since I've left the classroom, I've been doing a lot of PD with teachers. And when I think about professional learning, I was pretty dissatisfied with my experiences, mostly because there was a lack of differentiation, personalization in my experience at the different school districts where I worked. So I wanted to kind of address the problem and talk about professional learning today for a small bit of this. And then the other half, I'd like to talk about the way our company has created a solution for professional learning and some of the frustrations that teachers might have surrounding professional learning. So please feel free to use the Q&A when you have a question, and we'll address it at the end, if that's all right with everyone. So let's talk about what professional learning looks like right now. And I'm thrilled to be able to say that there are a variety of ways that school districts are using to promote professional learning. If you look on the left side of this comic, you can see that we used to have these day-long workshops. We'd have observations, but it was really these kind of systematic types of professional learning that wasn't very effective. Now, we can look at the professional learning wheel that's more on the right side, center and right side, and we can see that there are all these different ways that teachers can communicate, they can collaborate, they can go to different types of conferences, there's unconferences, there's ed camps, there's all these different ways for teachers to figure out which way they learn the best. The problem with this is that there's no way for a teacher to determine this if they don't know enough about their learning styles, number one, or number two, where they are in terms of their skill sets. So you can sign up for for all different types of professional learning, but if you don't know what you need to learn, because you don't have any data about your skill set in teaching, it makes it really impossible for you to sign up for exactly what you need. So while the professional learning landscape is changing, and I fully support the landscape, I'm worried about those teachers who need more direction in their development pathways. So when we think about that, what I like to say is that content is no longer king or queen. It used to be, when we were teaching, that you were a specialist in your content area or your pedagogy or your set of standards. From there, we moved towards teaching students concepts, and that became like a really big deal in the late, I would say in the early aughts. We were talking a lot about concepts, we were talking about these strategies for teaching, and we were talking about how we want students to meet the standards, which was really conceptualized for them to meet these different types of standards, and the content was kind of just in the background. Now, when we think of and I would say that the next step, 21st century skills, is already antiquated because we're well into the 21st century. But when we think of these new skills that we want our students to be competent in when they leave our school districts, skills such as collaboration, communication, information literacy, the ways we think about attacking a problem, the ways we communicate outside the four walls of our classrooms, those are all really, really important. And I'm interested in how we use content to support teaching students those skills. So instead of content being the big deal, now the content becomes the support mechanism that we use for these 21st century skills. And I think that's pretty fascinating. I think that's a pretty interesting way to think about teaching and to think about the ways we do teach. So let's talk about what's happening in schools today. we have a teacher shortage in the United States, like definitely. The Teaching the Teachers Full report says that we need 100,000 more teachers. We see that more than half of the educators are not satisfied with their professional learning, and that the best way is to use coaches and mentors. However, if you're a coach or a mentor and you go into a classroom, you have to observe for a while to understand where the teacher's strengths are and where their weaknesses are, where their areas of developmental need are. So the comic at the bottom really resonates with me. I'm just gonna leave that there for a second. There was a really important study, and Freakonomics podcast did an amazing report on this study that was done at Brown University by some economists. And if this is interesting to you, definitely look for this podcast on Freakonomics because it's fascinating. But they were looking at the value add of teachers. So beyond just being with the students every day and teaching them and developing lesson plans and assessing them and sharing the content that they know, we really see this emphasis of we need to have great teachers, because these are the types of metrics that we see if a great teacher is in the classroom rather than an average teacher. And it falls even further if the teacher is not a good teacher. So economically, it makes so much sense for school districts and for our communities to invest in teacher development. Because if we can move a teacher from an average performing teacher to a great teacher, look at the benefits of the students of that community. So to me, having some sort of rationale of why we need more, better, prescriptive professional learning makes a lot of sense. So we have this notion of personalization, and we personalize for students. This is the big jargon of the last 5 years, that we need to differentiate and personalize for all of our students, because our students come into our classroom with different backgrounds, different skill sets, different ways of learning, and if we can get to know them, we can reach them in the best way possible. And the idea is we do this, it's exhausting, it's time consuming, but we know that this is a really good way for students to access the content, access the learning opportunities that we're creating for them. However, we do not do this for educators. So we are saying to our students, we really value you and your learning style and your skills and competencies that you bring to the table, and we want to support those, and we want to address your weaknesses, and here's how we're going to do that, and it's going to be different for you, and it's going to be different for you, and it might be slightly different for you. No one does that for teachers, and that's problematic. We want to not necessarily model how we differentiate and personalize for students, but we want to make the effort, because in that effort, we can say to teachers, we value your time, we value everything that you have put into this profession. We know you are not compensated well, and we know that you work really, really hard to personalize for your students. In return, we will personalize for you. And in that way, you will really develop your practice and become more and more competent in more and more skills, and hopefully that will influence our student competencies at the same time. So this is Dave Levin. He's the founder of the KIPP schools, and he has a lot to say about professional learning, to the point where he has created his own graduate school of education called Relay Graduate School, because he doesn't think that the United States does a good job in preparing our students, preparing our pre-service teachers, and keeping our teachers around, retaining our teachers so that they continue to develop their practice. All too often we see a teacher who's really good get burnt out and then they leave because we're great at recruiting. We are not so great at the development and the retention. A lot of times our professional learning is about evaluation. It's about preparing teachers to be evaluated. And we know that for students, that's not good for learning. It's not good for professional educators as well. So my question is, why is our professional learning about evaluation and not about developing our practice? I want to be a better teacher every day. Yet, my professional learning opportunities at the school districts where I've worked were not supporting that being my goal. What they were supporting was me fitting into the matrix and scoring high, having high scores in specific areas where I was being evaluated. If I thought my practice was being considered, I may have taken it a little more seriously and I may have tried a little bit harder. But because it was about filling out an evaluation and not really about my skills, my interests, and my learning styles as an educator, it really became kind of a useless activity in my world. So one other problem, especially surrounding technology education, which is where I have put a lot of my eggs into that basket, is how do we get teachers to engage with technology education when the kids may be more advanced in their use of technology? The question I pose here to teachers is, the kids may have been using technology since their birth, but that doesn't mean they know how to learn with technology. So that is our job as educators, to create learning opportunities using our skill sets, using our knowledge about pedagogy and content and skill development and student access in order to use this technology for kids to excel. And I think that there's a little bit of a disconnect between student and teacher and the way we use technology. So when we talk about professional learning, we ask a lot of questions, or I'm asking a lot of questions that don't really have any answers. For example, what do we look for in a great teacher? I can walk into any classroom and know if the teacher is a great teacher or not. Could I describe it? Sure. I could describe his or her actions, his or her lesson design, his or her planning. But could I put it into quantifiable, measurable qualifications? I'm not sure that I can. It's that feeling of it. And how do we define it? And how do we identify the skills that allow that teacher to be it or to have it? And we talk about student outcomes all the time, but they're so general, it makes it really difficult for us to figure out what we're trying to do with all of these students. So should there be outcomes that are general, or should there be personalized outcomes? And should those match the teacher personalized outcomes? I'm curious about all of that. And if we take it a step further, we have these districts who are spending so much money on these professional learning programs to try to help develop teachers. Yet, how do we really judge that? And how do we really plan that? Do we do it at the beginning of the year? Do we do it at the midterm? Do we do it at the end of the year? And where are our metrics? Where's the data? So I want to talk about data, and I want to talk about smart data. I don't want to talk about data for data's sake. Smart data to me is any data that's collected that is, number one, used, number two, makes sense and is true in its collection, and number three, the results are considered when making decisions. If I collect a bunch of data in my classroom and I see that all of my students or many of my students do not understand the Pythagorean theorem, I don't just move on. I make the decision to stop and teach that and teach that and teach that until I get the data that supports that my students know that. All too often we collect data and then don't do anything with it, or we misinterpret it. So I'm interested in collecting meaningful data, especially about teacher skill sets, and then using that to help teachers design their own professional development or professional learning pathway. So this is what 2gnoMe does. We have identified this problem, and we've decided to try to figure out a way to solve it. Is it perfect? It's close, but I don't know if it's perfect yet, but it's pretty good. So here's the way it works. We take any framework. So in this case, you're going to see the ISTE standards for educators, the newer ones. And we take this framework and ask teachers to do a deep reflection on their classroom practice surrounding that framework. So in this case, we ask teachers to examine their practice using technology in the classroom. Our platform guides the teacher through that reflection, and then that teacher gets results. So I want to break this process down. Once we get through the educator side, I'd like to show you how administrators can use this to plan great professional learning for teachers. So what you see on your screen is the dashboard. So these are all of the 7 new standards from ISTE. The teacher just clicks on any of these to start the diagnostic, and they answer questions along the way. So these questions are all practice-based. None of them are belief questions. None of them are judgment questions. They are really, what do you do in your classroom using technology? Once the teacher goes through and answers the questions for each different section, that teacher will get a set of results. And what you see here are my results. And this is what I think I do, which is the you feel. This is the top part. And I think I am partially proficient in whatever skill set this is. What is shocking to me is that when I look at the answers to the diagnostic, my results show that I'm actually unsatisfactory. So within this metric, within this set of visual results, I realize that whatever this skill set is, I need professional learning. I need to work on this and develop this skill. Because, I mean, if we think about it from the beginning, I thought I was partially proficient to start with. So that probably means I think I need help with this. But then when I look at it even more closely, I realize I'm unsatisfactory. I am convinced that I am ready for professional learning in whatever this competency is. If I want to, I can add peer review. And my peers can be my colleagues that I trust. It could be my evaluators. It could be my administrators. Most importantly, it could be my clients, my students. And whatever this skill set is, they are saying that I am partially proficient as well. So I am totally interested in pursuing some professional learning in this area. The peer review it's anonymous, and I get to choose who my peer reviewers are. So I'm in control of that. It's also not mandatory. You can get results just based on your own self-reflection, but I think it's pretty meaningful to ask your students if they're learning well with you and from you. At the very end, I get this quote-unquote report card. And what this does is it provides the standards in the furthest left-hand column. Within each of the 7 standards, there are competencies broken down. So for example, the very first standard is learner. There are 3 competencies in learner: goal setting, lifelong learning, and professional learning. And my results show that I am partially proficient in goal setting, proficient in lifelong learning, and I have high interest in professional learning. On the furthest right-hand side, these are partner professional learning opportunities. So now I can start to chart my course. I might want to look at where I am partially proficient or unsatisfactory and focus on those areas of professional learning. But really what this is telling me is this is giving me a diagnostic report of these are the things that I am competent in along the ISTE framework, and these are the things that I need help with along the ISTE framework. So I can really start to determine what my personal professional development path should be. So I can click on this optimize button right here, and this will tell me which types of courses would be great for me. So we identify the skills with average or below average and then cross-reference that recommendation. So if I took these 3 professional learning courses these would probably help me minimize the effect. This would help me develop my areas of weakness in the most efficient way. So that's the educator experience. So here's a way for educators to do some reflection, answer questions about their practice, and come together and figure out what their professional learning pathway should be. I think this is a way for educators to address their professional learning personalization plan. So when I look at what the school administrators are saying, or excuse me, what the school administrators can see, they can see the amalgamated data from the entire district, and we can separate and sift and make reports about the data in a variety of ways. So for example, and this is not that there are a lot of ways that we can create reports, but here's one of them. I can take a look at all of the teachers who answered the diagnostic questions about learner. And I can see that I have some teachers on the right side that are at the higher end of the scale, and I have some teachers who are on the lower end of the scale. So this to me is really interesting data, because I can start to identify people who are really good at certain things and people who fall into a group that might need some help here. And what's really interesting to me, if I were an administrator, is I can see that the majority of my teachers fall under the mean. So this means that many of the teachers in this department or in this group or in this school could really benefit from some professional learning around this topic. A school district can also create and stick we can map to any professional learning that's already been created. So if your district has professional learning coursework already created, or sign-up sheets for live summits, or for any type of professional learning event, we can have the teachers, we can put any of the different coursework in there. We can also put in some learning resources. So depending on what the district goals are, we can create a district personalized professional learning plan with all of the resources that that district wants to use. We have a variety of partners who are also involved with ISTE Seal of Alignment, who are interested in, bolstering district PD programs with their coursework. And we have a lot of different ways that we can create professional learning plans for a district. We can also have the district leaders have their PD. They can see the teacher PD if that's something we wanted to do. We can have the dashboard available for each of the teachers and for each of the administrators. This is something that I really like. We can take the data and identify a teacher number 2, who has a really solid grasp on a skill set, and then identify teacher number 1 who really needs some work here, and we can create a mentor pairing. So now we can ask teacher number 2 to lead professional learning, to support other teachers in their school with that particular skill set, or become an induction type mentor teacher for teacher number 1. This idea of identifying leaders from within, I think, can be really powerful, because I personally think that teachers like to learn from their peers. And in the same respect, we can start looking at improvement over time. So we can start looking, so this is the learner, and we can start looking at where people are scoring by date. So if we wanted to do a pre, mid, post use of the diagnostic, we can see if teachers are really showing improvement based on their scores or their diagnostic scores over time, which I think could be really exciting for a lot of teachers and take some of that observational pressure off of teachers. Last but not least, what you see here is a way to separate the data. So for the example, we have a blue line that is all of the teachers in this school district. For the yellow line, we have it separated by gender and by content area. For the green line, we have it separated by gender and content area. And we also have it separated by just the content area. So we can dive into the different types of teachers that we have, the different content sets, the different age groups. We can talk about years of teaching and really start to get granular with the data so that we can create and spend our PD money in really smart ways. So in this case, we might see that we need to spend some money for the female science teachers, and we might need to spend for whatever the skill set is, and we don't need to spend that money for the male social studies teachers. Or we ask the male social studies teachers to come in and start helping the female science teachers, which seems like a weird dating game, and I'm not sure I'm in support of that. So here are the 4 advantages of using data to plan professional learning. I love this notion of using data to drive your decision-making skills. We do it for students all the time, and we value teachers, so we should do it for them as well. If this is something that you're interested in, you can grab a free demo and see where you fall on the diagnostic. I encourage you to try it out, and I encourage you to give it to your teachers to get their opinions on this, because I think it could be a really helpful tool. Well, feel free to contact me. My email is Lynn, Lynn, @2gnoMe. It's been a pleasure, and I hope that this was worth your time. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.